In the cold emptiness of space, far beyond the reach of any known star maps, something extraordinary happened. A signal, weak and trembling, drifted through the galaxy. It was not a natural sound. Not the whisper of stars or the hum of planets, it was a voice. It carried fear, pain, and desperation. Someone somewhere was calling for help. The message was ancient and broken, but one thing was clear. They were dying. A civilization was on the edge of extinction, and they were begging for anyone, anything to hear them. For centuries, the message wandered across the void, untouched and unheard. Planets rose and fell, stars burned bright and faded away, and still the cry continued its endless journey. When it finally brushed past the communication networks of powerful alien empires, they listened for a moment and then turned away. The signal came from a fragile species far away and already doomed. Helping them would bring no profit, only risk. So the mighty Deathworlders, those brutal ancient species who had conquered entire galaxies, chose silence. They let the message pass, forgotten like dust in starlight. But one day, against all odds, the signal reached a small blue planet. It was a quiet world circling an ordinary sun, filled with oceans, forests, and billions of noisy creatures who called themselves humans. The signal arrived unexpectedly, just a faint whisper caught by a deep space listening station in the deserts of Earth. At first, scientists thought it was a glitch, another random burst of cosmic noise. But as they decoded the fragments, their hearts began to race. The voice wasn't random. It wasn't human. And it was crying out for help. In a dimly lit control room, a young scientist named Dr. Lena Ortiz stared at the screen in disbelief. The data was clear. Someone out there was pleading for rescue. The words were distorted, the language strange, but the emotion behind it, fear, loss, sorrow, was something she recognized instantly. "My God," she whispered, "they're alive. Whoever they are." The room went silent. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, as the realization settled in, they began working furiously. Every computer hummed, every hand typed, every mind focused. Humanity had just received its first message from another intelligent life, and it wasn't a greeting. It was an SOS. Within hours, the news spread across the world. The headlines flashed everywhere. Alien SOS detected. People gathered around televisions, phones, and radios, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Some were terrified. Others were amazed. Conspiracy theories exploded, and social media filled with arguments. But beyond the noise, a quiet understanding grew. Somewhere out there in the endless black of space, someone needed help. Governments called emergency meetings. Scientists from every country came together, sharing data, translating patterns, analyzing the signal structure. They discovered it had traveled for more than 1,000 years before reaching Earth. The senders might already be gone. Yet even if they were, the message meant something far greater. It meant humanity wasn't alone. For the first time, humans had proof that they were part of something bigger, a universe filled with life. But this discovery also came with a heavy question. Should humanity respond? What if it was a trap? What if answering could expose Earth to unknown dangers? The debate began in secret halls far from the public eye. Some argued that it was not humanity's place to interfere in the affairs of other worlds. Others said ignoring it would be a betrayal of everything human beings stood for. They remembered their own history, the wars, the struggles, the times when no one came to help. Humanity knew what it felt like to cry out and be unheard. Maybe that was why the message struck such a deep chord. While leaders debated, ordinary people reacted in their own ways. Some built online groups to discuss the message, while others lit candles and prayed. Children asked their parents what it meant. Artists began painting stars filled with voices. Musicians wrote songs about the lonely call drifting through space. Humanity, once divided by borders, religions, and ideologies, now shared one unifying thought. Someone out there is asking for help, and we are the only ones who heard. As more data came in, linguists managed to decode a few words from the alien transmission. It spoke of a place called Vastera, a world under attack. The invaders were described as merciless, their technology far beyond what the victims could fight against. The message mentioned cities burning, skies filled with fire, and children crying for their parents. It was not a story of heroes, it was a story of survival. The last sentence of the transmission shook everyone who read it. "If anyone hears us, please remember we lived." Those words haunted people. It wasn't just a plea for help. It was a plea not to be forgotten. Dr. Ortiz couldn't sleep for nights after reading that line. She sat on her balcony, staring at the stars, imagining those unknown beings waiting for someone who would never come. What kind of people would we be, she whispered, if we turned away? Across the planet, millions felt the same. Something ancient stirred in the human heart, a mix of compassion, courage, and curiosity. Humanity, despite all its flaws, had always been defined by one thing: the refusal to ignore suffering. Then something even stranger happened. Astronomers discovered faint energy readings matching the same coordinates as the SOS signal. It wasn't completely dead. Somewhere in that direction, far beyond human reach, there was still activity, faint lights flickering in the dark. That meant the civilization might not be gone after all. The hope reignited. If they were still alive, then there was still time to help them. Governments, space agencies, and scientists united like never before. For once, no one talked about politics or territory. The question was simple: how could they answer? Humanity had no faster-than-light travel, no way to reach another star system within a lifetime. But that didn't stop them. They began to plan. Some proposed sending a reply signal. Others dreamed of a generation ship, a vessel that could travel for centuries, carrying human beings willing to live and die for a chance to reach that world. The world's leading engineers dusted off old plans from abandoned space projects. Rockets that had once been meant for Mars were redesigned. Private companies offered their resources. Even ordinary citizens began volunteering donations, materials, and ideas. For the first time in history, humanity was not preparing for war or exploration. They were preparing to answer a cry for help. In classrooms, teachers told children about the message and what it meant. In hospitals, doctors spoke of the courage it would take to help strangers light years away. In churches, mosques, and temples, leaders of faith reminded their followers that compassion has no boundaries, not even between worlds. Humanity, in all its diversity, found a shared purpose. Night after night, people looked up at the stars differently. Those distant points of light no longer seemed cold or unreachable. Somewhere among them, someone was waiting. And though the journey would be impossible, the thought of doing nothing was worse. Humanity, the species that had survived ice ages, wars, plagues, and despair, began to dream once again. This time, not for themselves, but for another. The faint SOS continued to echo through deep space, a whisper of a dying world. But now that whisper had found ears that cared. Earth scientists sent back the first response, a coded pulse of sound and light that said, "In simple universal logic, we hear you." It was humanity's first message to the stars, and though it would take years to reach its destination, it carried the full weight of who they were, a people who refused to ignore a cry for help. In that moment, something changed forever. The universe was no longer silent. The bond between two distant species, separated by time and space, had been formed through empathy alone. The stars, once indifferent, now seemed to watch with interest. Humanity, small and fragile though it was, had done something no Deathworlder ever dared. They had chosen compassion over fear. And as the signal left Earth, glowing faintly in the endless black, it carried a promise written not in words but in spirit: you are not alone anymore. The news of the alien SOS spread across every corner of the Earth, filling people's minds with wonder, fear, and hope. Scientists had confirmed that the message was real, not a hoax or a random signal. It came from a faraway world, so distant that light itself had taken more than 1,000 years to bring their voice to Earth. The realization shook humanity. A civilization had cried for help, and somehow, out of countless stars, the message had found its way to this small blue planet. Now the question was, what should humanity do about it? In every government hall, in every space agency, and every research center, debates began. The signal's translation showed pain, war, and loss. Whoever had sent it was facing destruction, but humans had no idea if that civilization still existed. Maybe they were long gone. Some scientists argued that answering the call would be meaningless. It was like trying to help ghosts. Others said it didn't matter if they were alive or not. The very act of answering would prove what kind of species humanity had become. At the United Earth Council in Geneva, leaders from all major nations gathered. It was the first time in decades that the entire world had united for one discussion. The room was filled with tension. "We barely understand what's out there," said one military general. "If we answer this signal, we might attract something dangerous." Another voice responded, "Maybe, but if we stay silent, we're no better than those who ignored them before us." The argument went on for days. Some feared that sending a signal could bring hostile attention to Earth. Others believed it was a moral duty to help. The debate wasn't just about science. It was about humanity's soul. Meanwhile, outside the walls of power, the people had already made their choice. Around the world, the story of the alien SOS became something deeply emotional. It was on every news channel, every phone, every classroom discussion. People felt an invisible connection to that dying civilization. They imagined mothers trying to protect their children, soldiers defending their homes, scientists sending one final signal into the dark. The image touched something inside humans, a memory of their own struggles. Earth, too, had faced wars, disasters, and hopeless times. And just like that alien world, humanity had survived because they helped one another. In small towns and big cities, protests and marches began, not out of anger, but out of compassion. Crowds held signs that said, "We hear you," and "Send help." Children drew pictures of rockets reaching for the stars. Poets and musicians turned the story into songs and poems that spread across social media. A famous writer said in an interview, "Maybe this message didn't come to us by chance. Maybe it came because humanity needed to remember who we are." People everywhere started to believe that this was not a coincidence, it was a calling. The pressure on world leaders grew. Scientists from NASA, ESA, and other space agencies met secretly to study the possibilities. Could humans even reach another star system? The answer was clear: not yet. The nearest stars were light years away, and human technology couldn't get there within a single lifetime. But humans were stubborn dreamers. When has impossibility ever stopped them before? Once they had looked at the moon and said it was unreachable, yet they walked on it. Now they looked at the stars with that same determination. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they also knew that doing nothing would haunt them forever. Dr. Lena Ortiz, the scientist who first decoded the signal, became one of the most powerful voices in the debate. Standing before the United Earth Council, she said, "We are not the only ones in this universe who can feel pain. If we have the power to listen, then we also have the duty to answer. If we can help, we must." Her words echoed across the room, and later across the entire world. People replayed her speech on the internet, and soon millions began repeating her phrase, "If we can help, we must." It became the heartbeat of a new movement, the Answer Initiative. The council finally voted. By a narrow margin, they decided to send a formal response to the alien SOS. It would take years for the message to reach its destination, but it was a start. Humanity's scientists began working around the clock to design a new kind of communication system, one that could send signals faster and stronger than ever before. But even as they prepared the reply, another question emerged. Should humanity stop at words? Could they send something more? Ships, help, or even people? The idea of a rescue mission was born. At first, it sounded impossible. The distances were too great, the risks too high. Yet deep down, everyone knew that if humanity had come this far, it was because of impossible dreams. The thought of sending ships to another world, carrying aid to strangers light years away, began to ignite imaginations. Engineers drew sketches of massive vessels capable of surviving long journeys. Astronomers plotted routes to the coordinates hidden in the alien signal. Scientists debated how humans and aliens could communicate once they met. Slowly, the dream began to take shape. The world changed. For the first time in history, nations that had once competed now shared knowledge. Engineers from rival countries worked side by side. Space agencies combined their technologies, pooling resources to build something greater than any single nation could create. Humanity began to see itself not as separate countries, but as one species. On television, a world leader declared, "This is not an American project or a Chinese project or a European project. This is a human project." The statement was met with thunderous applause around the world. Factories that once built weapons were converted to build spacecraft components. Students studying engineering dreamed of joining the mission. Retired astronauts returned to train the next generation. Scientists who had spent their lives studying the stars suddenly had a chance to change them. It wasn't about glory or exploration anymore. It was about compassion. Humanity was preparing not to conquer the stars, but to answer them. At the same time, not everyone supported the plan. Some groups believed Earth should remain silent, fearing that helping aliens might bring unknown dangers. They argued that humanity didn't even know how to help itself yet. "We can't save others if we're still fighting each other," they said. But even among the skeptics, there was curiosity. Something about the message refused to leave anyone unmoved. Deep inside, even those who doubted wanted to believe that this mission could unite them all. Months passed. Scientists decoded more fragments of the SOS. They discovered that the alien civilization had once been peaceful, full of art and science, much like Earth. Their downfall came when another powerful species invaded, seeking to enslave them. The transmission ended with their final moments: cities burning, skies torn apart, voices crying. Humanity watched the translated video in silence. Even the most skeptical leaders lowered their heads. They could no longer look away. The faces, on the screen, though alien, showed emotions humans understood too well: fear, love, and the desperate will to survive. That night, something changed across Earth. It wasn't just a project anymore, it was a promise. Humanity would not let the universe remember them as the species that turned away. Scientists named the plan Operation Lifeline. Its mission was simple: find out what happened to the senders of the SOS and, if possible, help them. Humanity didn't know how they would reach the stars, but they knew why they had to. Everywhere, people began to contribute. Billionaires donated their fortunes, engineers volunteered their time, and even small children sent messages of support. Churches, temples, and mosques collected offerings to fund the mission. For once, humanity wasn't divided by religion, politics, or greed. They were bound by a single purpose: to answer the cry of a dying world. Slowly, the dream turned into reality. Designs of new propulsion systems were tested. New materials for long-distance space travel were developed. Artificial intelligence programs were created to control ships that could travel for centuries. The first prototypes were built in secret, hangars, rising like giants of hope under the glow of Earth's moon. Every small success brought tears, cheers, and renewed determination. In the midst of all this progress, Dr. Ortiz stood on a rooftop one evening, watching the stars. She thought of that lonely world whose voice had crossed the ages to reach them. Somewhere out there, beyond the veil of darkness, they had believed someone might come. "You were right to hope," she whispered softly. "We're coming." The world had changed forever. The SOS had started as a faint, dying signal, but it awakened something powerful in humankind. It reminded them of what made them special. Not their weapons, not their technology, but their heart. And so, as the first ships began to take shape and the engines roared to life, the people of Earth looked to the stars not with fear, but with love. Humanity was ready to answer the call, and in doing so, they were about to rediscover their own soul. After years of preparation, humanity's plans began to take shape. What started as a distant idea, a message received from an alien civilization in danger, had now transformed into something tangible. Ships were no longer sketches on paper. They were massive constructions of metal, energy, and hope. Entire continents were involved, their engineers, scientists, and dreamers working tirelessly day and night. Earth had never seen such collaboration before. Every nation, every agency, every person who could contribute was united by a single goal: to reach a world crying for help, to answer the SOS, and to prove that humanity cared. The first step was launching the human fleet. Unlike fleets of war that had once roamed the Earth's imagination, this was a fleet of salvation. It carried more than weapons or soldiers. It carried hope. The ships were equipped with medical units, laboratories, translation technology, engineers, and supplies capable of rebuilding entire cities. Each vessel had a unique mission: Some were designed to communicate with the alien species, some to repair infrastructure, and some to defend against any threats they might encounter. Even though humanity had never faced the enemies described in the SOS firsthand, they refused to underestimate the unknown. They had studied every possibility, every scenario, yet they also relied on something far more important: courage. The launch itself was an event the world would never forget. Broadcast on screens across the globe, millions of people watched as the first fleet lifted from Earth's surface. Rockets roared like thunder, engines blazing bright against the night sky. Cities celebrated with fireworks, and people gathered in streets and squares to witness what many called the beginning of a new era. It wasn't just a space mission, it was a symbol. For the first time, humanity was not reaching for the stars to conquer or explore. They were reaching to save another life, to answer a call across light years of darkness. The ships moved in perfect formation, their paths calculated to ensure maximum safety and efficiency. Each crew member carried both pride and fear. They were the first humans to attempt a mission of this scale, one that would take them far beyond the safety of their planet. Families said their goodbyes holding back tears, knowing that the journey could last lifetimes. Yet even with uncertainty looming over them, the knowledge of purpose gave every astronaut and scientist resolve. They were not alone. They carried the hopes of every human being alive, and that knowledge was a power greater than any engine or weapon. As the fleet left Earth's orbit, the signal from the distant SOS grew stronger in their instruments. The aliens' plight, once just a story, now became a reality for those aboard the ships. Engineers studied the transmission, hoping to find coordinates that might lead them to the exact location of the surviving civilization. Linguists worked to understand the nuances of the alien language, preparing for the moment when direct communication would be possible. Even the youngest crew members felt the weight of history on their shoulders. They were about to enter uncharted space for a purpose never attempted by any other species. But the journey was far from easy. Space, even in a human-made corridor, is unforgiving. The fleet faced turbulence from cosmic storms, minor mechanical failures, and unexpected gravitational forces. Each problem tested humanity's ingenuity and determination. Repair teams worked tirelessly, often risking their lives outside the protective shells of their vessels to fix crucial systems. Every challenge overcame only strengthened the crew's resolve. Every obstacle reminded them that survival depended not just on technology, but on the will to persist, on teamwork, and on hope. During the long months of travel, the human fleet developed a rhythm. Astronauts trained for encounters with the unknown. Medics ran simulations for treating alien physiology, and engineers continued refining their equipment. Outside their ships, the universe stretched infinitely, filled with stars and darkness alike. For some, the sight was humbling. For others, it was inspiring. They carried the belief that this was not just a mission, it was the defining moment for humanity, an opportunity to prove that compassion could transcend the vast distances of space. Communication with Earth became an essential part of the journey. Scientists on the ground guided the fleet, providing real-time updates on navigation, power systems, and potential hazards. Messages from home reminded the crew why they were doing this. Children sent drawings and letters calling the mission the Journey of Hope. Elderly citizens recorded stories of humanity's past struggles and triumphs, reminding the crew of the resilience they inherited. Every message strengthened the human spirit aboard the ships, reinforcing the idea that they carried not just supplies, but the very essence of humanity itself. As they neared the coordinates extracted from the SOS, tension grew. The alien world known as Vastera was unlike anything humans had ever seen. Its atmosphere shimmered in strange colors, and sensors picked up massive structures, both damaged and intact. Signs of conflict were visible from space: craters, collapsed buildings, and energy signatures indicating destruction. Yet despite the devastation, there were still signs of life. Faint energy readings suggested survivors moving through the ruins, hiding and trying to survive. The human crew realized that the mission had entered its most critical phase. First contact. Making contact with a civilization whose language, culture, and experiences were entirely unknown was a daunting task. Teams used every tool available: Visual signals, universal mathematical patterns, and sounds designed to convey peace. Hours turned into days as they attempted to communicate, and every small response from the alien side filled the crew with cautious hope. This was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a test of understanding, of empathy, and of patience. One wrong move could result in misunderstanding, fear, or even hostility. Humanity had prepared for everything, yet nothing could fully simulate the moment of true first contact. Finally, after weeks of careful signaling, a response came. It was weak, fragmented, and trembling, much like the SOS that had reached Earth years ago, but it was unmistakably a reply. The Vosterans were alive, and they had noticed the human fleet. The crew aboard the ships felt a mix of relief, joy, and nervous anticipation. These weren't just strangers. They were beings who had suffered, survived, and now placed their trust in humanity's willingness to help. The first direct communication opened a window into a world of culture, struggle, and hope that humans could barely imagine. The human fleet positioned itself to enter the planet's orbit safely. Engineers calculated trajectories that would avoid debris, unstable structures, and unpredictable atmospheric patterns. The medics prepared for the first evacuation missions, carrying supplies, medical equipment, and essentials for survival. Translators worked tirelessly, attempting to understand the alien language more fully, preparing for direct dialogue with leaders, families, and communities. Every crew member felt the weight of responsibility. They were not just representing humanity, they were representing hope itself, arriving at a world that had given up hope long ago. But the mission wasn't only about saving lives. It was also about setting an example for the galaxy. Many species had witnessed the human response from afar. The Deathworlders, who had ignored the SOS at first, were observing silently. Humanity's actions, sending a fleet not for war but for aid, shook the expectations of civilizations that believed compassion was weakness. Every careful maneuver, every act of kindness, every patient attempt at communication sent ripples through the galaxy. Humanity was proving that even a young and seemingly fragile species could act with courage, intelligence, and morality on a scale larger than their home planet. As the ships prepared to land, the crew looked at each other with a mixture of determination and reverence. Years of planning, months of travel, and decades of human history had led to this moment. They were about to touch down on a world that had cried for help, to meet beings whose voices had traveled across the stars and finally found an answer. The fleet moved in unison, engines glowing, shields ready, and hearts full of hope. Humanity was stepping into a new chapter, one where their actions would define not just themselves, but the entire universe's perception of their species. The first ships entered the planet's orbit, revealing the full scope of the devastation. Cities once proud and full of life were now in ruins, and the remnants of their civilization were scattered across the landscape. Fires burned in some areas while smoke and dust filled the skies. Yet among the ruins, humans detected movement, life clinging to survival. Rescue teams prepared to descend, careful not to startle or endanger the beings they had come to save. This was no longer an abstract mission. It was real, urgent, and profoundly human. Humanity's first contact mission had reached its climax. Every calculation, every plan, every decision was about to be tested in the most intense way possible. Yet even as tension filled the air, there was hope, courage, and unity. The fleet carried not just ships and supplies, but the essence of a species determined to answer a cry for help across the cosmos. Humanity had reached Vastera, and what they would do next would echo not just across the stars, but through history itself. The human fleet had arrived, and the answer to the SOS was finally within reach. The human fleet descended toward Vastera with a mix of awe, fear, and determination. From orbit, the planet looked beautiful in a way that contrasted sharply with the destruction on its surface. Forests and rivers glimmered under the alien sun, yet smoke and ash rose from cities that had once been alive with culture, art, and civilization. The ship's sensors detected movement, confirming what they had hoped but feared at the same time. There were still survivors. Small groups of alien beings moved cautiously, hiding behind ruins, wary of any new arrivals. The SOS had reached them long ago, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for humans. Landing on Vastera was complicated. The terrain was unpredictable, filled with craters, collapsed structures, and remnants of destructive weapons. The human engineers calculated precise trajectories, ensuring that each vessel could land safely while avoiding debris. Every landing was tense. One wrong move could endanger not just the crew but the survivors they had come to help. Yet despite the danger, the humans pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose that no machine or calculation could replace. As the first human teams disembarked, they were met with silence. The alien survivors observed cautiously from a distance, unsure whether to flee or trust these strange beings. The humans moved slowly, deliberately, their gestures meant to convey peace. Medics and engineers carried medical kits, food supplies, and communication devices, while translators attempted to bridge the language gap. Humanity had prepared for first contact, but nothing could fully simulate the tension of meeting a civilization that had endured unimaginable suffering. The first encounters were awkward, yet profound. Alien children peeked out from hiding, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Adults observed from ruined buildings, their bodies tense, their expressions guarded. Yet when the humans offered water, food, and medical attention, a small sense of trust began to emerge. It was a fragile trust, easily broken. As humans spread out across Vastera, they encountered the full extent of the destruction. Cities were leveled, transportation networks destroyed, and energy grids inoperative. Hospitals had been obliterated, leaving injured survivors without care. The invading forces had not just sought conquest, they had sought annihilation. The aliens had survived through ingenuity, hiding in tunnels, forests, and makeshift shelters. Now the human fleet's arrival offered a lifeline, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. Medical teams immediately set to work. They treated injuries ranging from burns to broken bones to infections caused by unsanitary conditions. Even with their advanced equipment, the humans were careful not to overwhelm the aliens who were unfamiliar with human procedures. Translators helped explain the treatments, while medics offered words of reassurance, holding the hands of those who were terrified. Each life saved reinforced the fleet's purpose and showed the aliens that they were not alone in their struggle. Engineers began reconstructing infrastructure. They repaired energy systems, cleared debris from streets, and restored communication networks. The work was slow, but progress was visible, and the survivors began to respond. Children who had been hiding came out to watch, mimicking the humans' actions with curiosity and wonder. Adults began to cooperate, providing guidance on local terrain and sharing what knowledge they had of the attacks that had destroyed their cities. Humanity's willingness to help, to work alongside them rather than impose, was a revelation to the Vasterans. But the human mission was not without danger. The invading forces, though scattered, had left automated defense systems, mines, and unstable weapons behind. Humans had to navigate these threats carefully, disarming devices while avoiding further destruction. It was a delicate balance. Act too quickly and they might trigger more harm. Act too slowly and more lives could be lost. Each challenge required creativity, courage, and calm under pressure. Human teams relied on their training, their intelligence, and their trust in one another to overcome every obstacle. Communication continued to be a challenge. The Vasterans' language was complex, filled with tones and signals unfamiliar to humans. Translators worked tirelessly, analyzing sounds, gestures, and symbols to convey meaning. Slowly, basic understanding emerged. The aliens learned that the humans were there to help, not to judge or control. Humans learned about the aliens' lives before the attacks, their culture, families, and hopes. Each new piece of understanding deepened the bond between the species. Trust grew, fragile yet undeniable, as both sides realized that survival depended on cooperation. The invaders, although largely absent, had left marks of their cruelty everywhere. Signs of experimentation on alien children, scorched villages, and broken monuments reminded humans that the mission was about more than rebuilding. It was about preventing further suffering. The fleet's soldiers and medics worked tirelessly to remove hazards, protect survivors, and ensure that no lingering threats remained. Every small victory, every life saved, reinforced the idea that humanity had arrived not just to respond but to protect. Over time, the alien survivors began to participate actively in their own recovery. Encouraged by the humans' example, they helped clear rubble, distribute supplies, and care for the injured. Children, once fearful, played safely near restored structures. Adults, once wary, began teaching the humans about their world, guiding them to areas of need and sharing strategies that had kept them alive. The partnership between species became a model of cooperation, demonstrating that recovery was possible when two civilizations worked together toward a common goal. Despite progress, the emotional toll on both humans and aliens was immense. The vast Terrans had suffered unimaginable loss, and humans faced the harsh reality of what war and devastation meant on a scale they had never encountered. Tears, grief, and frustration were common, yet they also experienced moments of hope, laughter, and joy as survivors began to rebuild their lives. The human presence provided more than medical care or supplies. It offered companionship, empathy, and a reminder that life could continue despite tragedy. The human fleet also had to manage internal challenges. Crews worked long shifts, often in dangerous conditions, with little rest. Supplies had to be rationed carefully, and decisions about prioritizing aid were difficult. Yet through it all, morale remained high. Every small success, an injured child healed, a broken building stabilized, a survivor safely reunited with family, reminded everyone why they were there. Humanity had entered a world of chaos and despair, and their actions were restoring not just life but dignity. Over the months, the full impact of humanity's presence became clear. The Vasterans, who had once hidden in fear, now began to hope. Communities started to form again, small markets reopened, and children returned to play openly. Human engineers implemented systems to protect against future attacks, while medics trained local healers to continue caring for the injured. The survivors began to rebuild their culture alongside the humans, learning new technologies while preserving their traditions. The SOS that had traveled across the stars had finally been answered, and the aliens' lives were no longer defined by fear. The Deathworlders, who had watched humanity's actions from afar, could not ignore what they had witnessed. A species they had considered weak, young, and inexperienced had faced the devastation left by a far stronger enemy and refused to falter. They had provided aid, protection, and understanding without expecting anything in return. Humanity's courage and compassion had become a message across the galaxy. True strength is not measured in power or destruction, but in the ability to protect, heal, and empathize. The human fleet stayed on Vastera long enough to ensure stability. Medical teams continued their work. Engineers finished restoring essential systems, and communication links with Earth were established to report progress and receive further supplies. Even as humans prepared to leave, they had left behind knowledge, technology, and hope that would allow the Vasterans to thrive independently. The survivors now knew that they were not alone, that across the vast emptiness of space, a species had answered their call and stood with them. As the fleet prepared to depart, the humans took one last survey of the planet. Fires had been extinguished, survivors were receiving care, and communities were beginning to function again. Children waved as the ships lifted into the sky, and adults offered gestures of gratitude that needed no words. Humanity had done more than rescue a civilization. They had restored faith, courage, and life. Vastera, once a symbol of desperation and suffering, had become a testament to what could happen when compassion met action. The mission was far from over, but the hardest work had been done. Humans had faced destruction, danger, and the unknown, yet they had emerged not only successful but transformed. The bond formed between the species would echo for generations, a reminder of what it meant to act with courage and empathy. Humanity had answered the SOS with everything they had, proving that even a small, fragile species could make a difference on a cosmic scale. The stars themselves seemed to acknowledge it, shining a little brighter over Vastera as if celebrating the triumph of hope, resilience, and humanity. The legacy of the mission would last forever, not just in the memories of those rescued or in the reports sent back to Earth, but in the example it set across the galaxy. Humanity had arrived, risked everything, and refused to turn away from suffering. The fleet's actions became a story told in countless systems, a message that echoed across civilizations. When life cries for help, compassion can travel farther than any weapon, and courage can shine brighter than any star. Vastera had survived, and humanity had proven itself in the most extraordinary way. The SOS had been answered, the stars had witnessed, and the universe would never forget. The final chapter of humanity's mission on Vastera was unlike anything the fleet had ever imagined. The initial panic, Fear and chaos that had greeted their arrival had gradually given way to cooperation, understanding, and hope. Over the months, the humans had become more than rescuers. They were teachers, healers, and companions. They had healed wounds, repaired cities, and offered guidance to a civilization that had been on the brink of extinction. Yet as the time came to prepare for departure, a new realization dawned. Humanity's actions had done more than save lives. They had reshaped the galaxy's understanding of what humans could be. The Vasterans, once silent and broken, now thrived with cautious optimism. Small markets reopened in cleared streets, schools and communal centers began to function, and survivors began to rebuild cultural traditions that had been interrupted by war. Humans had not only provided physical aid, but had empowered the Vasterans to take control of their own recovery. Engineers had taught them new construction techniques. Medics had trained local healers, and communicators had developed systems to maintain contact with the fleet and Earth. Every step forward was a testament to what could be achieved when compassion met intelligence and courage. The children fascinated the humans the most. Initially shy and fearful, they now ran freely across the restored streets, their laughter ringing through the ruins like music. Some had never known peace, their earliest memories filled with destruction and loss. The humans, in turn, learned from them, about resilience, hope, and the innocence that could survive even the darkest times. Humans shared stories from Earth, simple tales of survival, creativity, and kindness. In return, the children told their own stories, describing life before the attack, their dreams for the future, and their hopes for the humans who had saved them. This exchange of stories became a bridge, connecting two species across unimaginable distances. Even adults who had initially watched the humans with suspicion began to trust and collaborate. They guided the humans through terrain still unstable from the attack, sharing knowledge of local dangers, hidden shelters, and secret caches of resources. Together, they rebuilt infrastructure, restoring energy systems, sanitation, and communication networks. The process was slow and meticulous, but it was driven by determination. Humans and Vasterans worked side by side, united in purpose. For the first time in a long time, the survivors felt safe enough to plan for the future, rather than simply fight to survive the present. The human fleet also faced challenges of its own. Supplies were finite, and the journey back to Earth was long. Crews had to balance their responsibilities to the Vasterans with the need to preserve their own resources. Difficult decisions arose. Who needed immediate medical attention? Which areas required repairs first? And how could training and aid be given efficiently to ensure the civilization could sustain itself after humans left? Despite these challenges, the fleet worked with precision, relying on planning, teamwork, and the unwavering belief that their mission mattered. Every decision was informed not just by logic, but by a moral compass that prioritized life and dignity above all else. Communication with Earth became increasingly important as the mission progressed. Humans transmitted detailed reports, maps, and status updates, ensuring that further aid could be sent even after their departure. Earth's population followed the mission closely, inspired by the bravery and compassion on display. The SOS that had once traveled across 1,000 light-years to reach a small blue planet had now come full circle, inspiring billions back home. The story of the mission spread across galaxies, reaching the ears of species who had once doubted humanity's potential. It became clear that Earth's response to the crisis was not just a local event. It was a message to the universe. Humans were capable of extraordinary courage and empathy. The Deathworlders, the powerful species that had ignored the SOS when it first appeared, took notice. They had observed humanity's actions from afar, expecting perhaps weakness or naivety. Instead, they witnessed determination, collaboration, and moral clarity. Humans had arrived, faced a civilization in ruin, and worked tirelessly to restore hope and safety. They had risked their lives, crossed unimaginable distances, and succeeded where others might have turned away. This challenged long-held assumptions about humanity, inspiring admiration and perhaps even respect among the galactic observers who had once dismissed them. As the mission drew to a close, the humans began preparations to leave Vastera. While some wanted to stay indefinitely, it was understood that their role was to empower the Vasterans, not to replace them. Leaving would be difficult for both humans and aliens, as bonds had formed through shared struggle, laughter, and grief. Tears were shed during farewells. Promises of continued communication were made and gifts were exchanged. A mixture of technology, knowledge, and symbolic tokens representing trust and solidarity. The humans had come as strangers, but they left as friends, their legacy embedded in the rebirth of a world once thought lost. Before departure, the fleet held a final ceremony. Humans and Vosterans gathered on the central plateau of a restored city, where survivors offered speeches of gratitude. Children presented artworks depicting humans as guardians. Adults recounted moments of bravery and kindness, and human leaders spoke of the shared journey. The message was clear. While humans had come to help, it was the courage of the Vosterans themselves that had made recovery possible. The two species had learned from each other, and the bond forged through adversity would endure. As the ships lifted from Vostera, the planet below shimmered in the alien sunlight, a mix of recovery and hope. Humans gazed out at the landscapes they had helped restore, feeling the weight of accomplishment and the bittersweet sting of departure. The mission had been perilous, testing every skill, every moral conviction, and every ounce of courage. Yet in every life saved, every structure repaired, every moment of trust gained, humanity had proven itself capable of far more than survival. They had reshaped a civilization, inspired a galaxy, and, in doing so, redefined what it meant to be human. The journey back to Earth was filled with reflection. Crew members shared stories of the challenges they had faced, the moments that had tested them, and the joys they had witnessed. Every astronaut and medic carried memories that would last a lifetime. The smile of a child seeing safe water for the first time, an alien family reunited after years of separation, engineers teaching new technologies that would allow a civilization to flourish. These memories were more valuable than any scientific data or material achievement. They were proof that humanity could make a difference on a cosmic scale. Back on Earth, the news of the mission's success inspired celebrations and reflection. Humanity had done something no species had done before: answer an ancient cry for help and restore hope to an entire civilization across the stars. The SOS that had first reached Earth centuries after it was sent had sparked a chain of events that proved compassion and courage could transcend distance, time, and even cultural differences. Humanity had faced the unknown and emerged not just victorious but morally triumphant. The lessons of Vostera spread beyond the scientific and political communities. Schools taught children about the mission, emphasizing courage, empathy, and the importance of helping others regardless of distance or difference. Artists, writers, and musicians were inspired to create works celebrating the story, ensuring it would live in culture for generations. Humanity had witnessed firsthand that acts of kindness and bravery could echo across the universe, touching lives that had been considered unreachable. The fleet's mission became a symbol of what was possible when a species chose morality over indifference. In the aftermath, relationships between species began to shift. The Vosterans, now equipped with knowledge and technology provided by humans, started rebuilding their society with a new sense of purpose. They honored the humans as friends and allies, not saviors in a hierarchical sense, but partners in a shared struggle against the cruelty that had threatened their existence. Across the galaxy, other civilizations observed and reconsidered their assumptions about humanity. The story of courage, determination, and empathy traveled faster than any spaceship, becoming legend among the stars. The human fleet, though returning to Earth, left a permanent presence behind in the form of knowledge, technology, and cultural exchange. Humans had not only healed a civilization, but they had created the tools for that civilization to thrive independently. They had built more than infrastructure. They had built trust, collaboration, and hope. Vostera would never forget the humans who had answered their call. Humanity's legacy was etched not just in memory, but in every functioning system, every smiling face, and every future generation that would grow up knowing that someone had cared enough to cross the stars for them. Ultimately, the mission redefined humanity's place in the galaxy. No longer were humans seen as weak, fragile, or irrelevant. They were a species capable of courage, compassion, and profound moral action. The SOS that had traveled light years to Earth had set in motion a transformation, not just for the Vosterans, but for humanity itself. The universe had witnessed the truth. When humans choose to act with empathy and courage, their actions can resonate across the stars. As the fleet returned home, the crew reflected on everything they had experienced. They had traveled unimaginable distances, faced danger, and seen the resilience of a species other than their own. They had learned that hope is a force stronger than fear, that courage can take many forms, and that compassion is the ultimate expression of power. Humanity had answered a cry for help, and in doing so, had left an indelible mark on the universe. Vastera thrived, humans returned to Earth, and the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. A civilization had been saved, bonds had been formed, and the universe had been reminded that even the smallest species could perform the greatest acts of heroism. Humanity's answer to the SOS had shaken the stars, proving that when life calls for help, courage, empathy, and determination can travel farther than light itself, changing everything in their path. The story of the mission would be remembered forever, not as a tale of war or conquest, but as a testament to the power of compassion, unity, and the unbreakable human spirit. Through this journey, humans had shown that even across the vast emptiness of space, one species could answer a desperate call and, in doing so, reshape the fate of countless lives. The SOS had been answered and the universe had listened.